We're talking today with Matthew Oudbier of Allendale, Michigan, and the interviewer is James Smither of the Grand Valley State University Veterans History Project. Okay, Matthew, start us off with some background on yourself, and to begin with, where and when were you born?
So I was born in Bremerton, Washington. My dad was in the Marine Corps, and so he was initially stationed out in Camp Pendleton in California, and then was assigned up to, I believe, Marine Security Guard in Bremerton. So my mother relocated up there. I was born, and then shortly after they moved back down to Pendleton. But that's where I was born.
Okay. And then did you move around a lot when you grew up, or did you stay in the San Diego area?
Not so much. For the most part, all I remember is Camp Pendleton. We lived on base housing for the most part. I think we lived out in town for a while, but my parents are from Grand Rapids, Michigan. So after my dad had gotten out, they moved back, and I think I was about 10 at the time we moved back, and then I spent the rest of my time growing up in Grand Rapids.
Okay. Now, what do you remember, or what sticks in your mind about the time growing up in Camp Pendleton, just being a kid there?
I know. So my dad served during the Persian Gulf, so he had actually gone on deployment. So I mean, there was a small period that I remember him being gone for a while, and then just family watching the news, kind of checking up what's going on there. And then I remember the homecoming. I remember before they left, they had a family day, and they had lined up all the weapons and had blank rounds in them and stuff, and had some of the Humvees and the tanks out there, so the kids could, check them out and stuff. But I don't think I really understood especially when we live on base housing, didn't really understand the community that we lived in, that everyone there had a parent serving in the military in some capacity, and I don't think I really kind of understood that. It was just kind of being a kid. And,
That's just what was there. Okay,
Yeah.
so then you're 10 years old and you moved to Grand Rapids, and then what was that transition like?
It wasn't difficult. I think so. We ended up staying with my dad's mom, my grandmother, for the first couple months when we moved back in, while my parents were looking for housing. And then I know my dad had kind of bounced around jobs for a while when he got out, and eventually got a position at the post office, which he has been working ever since. But for me, it was kind of roll with it. I had two younger brothers at the time who were in somewhat close proximity of age to me. So I was, busy with them and, just kind of being a kid, I guess.
All right. And so where did you go to high school?
I bounced around high schools quite a bit. So I initially went to East Kentwood for freshman and sophomore year. Then I went to Creston for a year, and then after that I went to Northview Alternative. At that point, my decision was to join the Marine Corps. So at that point, I was kind of ready to finish school, and I was actually in a position where East Kentwood had more credits. I'd earned more credits than I needed, and so going to Northview Alternative, I'd only have to stay there for another semester, and then I'd be able to graduate early. So I was able to ship off to boot camp, before the summer, before I actually graduated.
Okay. And at what point did you decide that you wanted to go into the Marine Corps?
I think it was my sophomore year where I really kind of made that decision. I think it was a lot of things that kind of played into that. My dad being in the Marine Corps. I think the year prior to my sophomore year, the September 11th attacks occurred, and I guess I didn't see any other kind of options. There wasn't a whole lot, I guess, I had going for me at the time. I was not I was a bright student, but I was not, I had a problem with authority, and I guess joining the Marine Corps was maybe not the first conclusion you make, but I figured I could use that to kind of get myself straightened out in a way.
You would kind of have to learn to deal with authority at that point.
Yes.
Because you were going to get a lot of it. But you had a pretty good understanding on some level of what the Marine Corps was all about because you'd grown up with it.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. And do you remember how you learned about 9/11?
So I was, I believe it was my freshman year. I was in, I want to say, a history class, if I'm not mistaken, and someone came down the hall and said, you know, turn on the TV, and they turned on the TV, and we sat there and watched what was kind of unfolding, and no one really knew what was going on. So, you know, I believe we finished out the day, you know, as kind of normal after that, but it was kind of, people were kind of confused on what was going on,
Right.
for the most part.
Okay. All right. So then, so when do you actually, you finish high school, and so when do you actually enter the Marine Corps?
So that was in February 2004. They had the delayed entry program, and I had signed up for that in my beginning of my senior year, which I believe is where they will accept people in the delayed entry program. So I was signed up for that, and I had let the recruiter know what was my plans were to graduate a semester early. So after December, I had gotten all the credits I needed to graduate, and then he told me that, well, we're just gonna, once we have an open slot for you, we're gonna put you in there, so you are kind of at a moment's notice at this point. And then come February, I got the call saying that they're gonna take me down to MEPS in Lansing and process me to enlist.
Okay. Now, how much, in the year when you were going in, I mean, how much kind of test taking and processing did you do before you actually went off to training?
So I mean, there was the ASVAB that we had to take, and I took that in, I want to say my junior year, maybe, and I had done exceptionally well on there. And then, like in the delayed entry program, because you have to do they want you to do an initial PFT, so it's
Is it a physical?
yeah, a physical training test, and it's like a mile and a half run and sit-ups and pull-ups, and so I had done that before I enlisted, when I was in the delayed entry program. And in the delayed entry program, they kind of go through you know, they tried to help train you on kind of some of the basic things you're going to need to know. You do a little marching, they do physical fitness activities, a lot of organized sports or hiking, stuff like that. I actually didn't participate a whole lot with that because I figured I was going to be joining and I'd be getting a load of that stuff. So,
Right. Okay.
But they had some of that, and I did participate with some of
Okay.
it.
And then were you, before you go out there, were you given a chance to kind of express preference for what kind of training you would get, or would that all come later?
So I was asked, and I asked to join the infantry, and they, for some reason, said they didn't have any positions open for that, because I had, and I don't know if it was because I had a high ASVAB score that they didn't want to put me in there, or it was because they were actually full in infantry position. I don't know if that's possible, but so I ended up signing for a general field, which was command and control electrician. It's kind of a broad field, and then I ended up getting assigned to a radio operator because I initially was going to sign in open contract just so I could, you know, they could put me where I needed to, kind of roll the dice and see how that goes. And my recruiter was like, well, you got to pick something, or at least an area of specialty and stuff. So that's what I ended up doing, and I come to find out I'd be a radio operator, which is, in my opinion, kind of the next best thing in a way, because you actually get to, there's more flexibility with the radio operator. Every unit has radio operators, every unit needs them, so you can be in infantry units, you can be in air units, you can be in whatever.
Okay.
So.
All right. Now they take you. Okay. So where do you do your basic training?
I did mine in San Diego, and at the recruit depot there, and that was 13 weeks, and lots of fun.
Okay. Now, in the Vietnam era, there was kind of the whole ritual surrounding actually arriving there, coming in the middle of the night, and all of this kind of stuff. So, what happens when you go out there? When you first arrive, how does that work?
I mean, I believe it's not a whole lot different than it's been in the past. I mean, we arrived and it was late at night, and we get to the yellow footprints there. The bus driver was really nice, and then when we pulled up yellow footprints, and they got blinding white lights shining on the area, and then the drill instructors come on and start barking orders. Everyone get out on the footprints, and then you kind of go through in processing. You know, I think the first thing you do is get the haircut, and then you go through and you get loaded in with equipment and stuff. So you get uniforms and then hygiene equipment, all kinds of stuff. You just kind of are, you know, corralled through this thing, and then eventually you get into a receiving barracks. And I think we're actually receiving for like 3 days, waiting. And after that whole initial period, it kind of really slows down, and you're just kind of being marched from chow to you know, breakfast to lunch to dinner, and then I think you're doing cleaning and stuff in between, just kind of to hold you over, but you're not doing a whole lot in the receiving.
Okay. And how much of this were you expecting when you went in?
Well, the initial stuff I was expecting. The latter part of the receiving, not really. I mean, I think a lot of us, it was kind of, we were all anticipating, you know, the boot camp, and the receiving was not. I think the drill instructors that are in receiving are generally on their way out of being drill instructors. They've done their time, and they're kind of, that's their last leg of their drill instructor tour. So they're not as you know, hard-nosed as the drill instructors you're going to get for your platoon.
Okay. All right. So, and then were you waiting just to fill up the ranks of a training unit, or?
I'm not sure. I think they just have the receiving cycle where, you know, I believe we also went through shots and medical screening and stuff like that. So I think it's just the time to process you in and get everyone situated. And it may be, well, I don't know if they're waiting on to fill everyone up, because I think everyone I had came with ended up being in the platoon that I was in for the most part.
All right. Okay. So now when training actually starts, what does that consist of?
So there's the Marine Corps does 3 phases of training. The first phase is are just kind of breaking you down. A lot of it is getting used to the system they've got going on. You know, we do a lot of physical training, a lot of what they call ITing, which is I forgot the act, what it stands for, but essentially the drill instructors will take the group and have them do push-ups until they scream for mercy. And there was some classes in there also. I think a lot of it was general Marine Corps history, that kind of stuff we went over. Second phase, we actually moved, so that's in San Diego. And then the second phase, we go up to Camp Pendleton, and there's a barracks there, and that's where we get into our field training portion. So a lot of classes on the rifle, on patrolling and maneuvering. We do the rifle range up there, and then at the end of that is when we do the crucible, the final exercise for that, which is I think 72-hour movement. I think they give us like 2 hours of sleep a night or something like that, if you're lucky. And you get, I think, a meal and a half for the 3 days. And then ending with, I want to say, a 15-kilometer hike. And I think at the top is where that's where we got our I think McMat belts. In the past, I know they've changed it around. In the past, that was kind of the very end. You would do this, and you'd get your Eagle Globe and Anchor. For us, by that time, it was you get to in the second phase, somewhere in the middle, and you get your McMat belt. And then third phase is kind of refining, where they're going over additional classes and stuff. And you're focusing a lot on drill, and we get to blouse our boots at that time, and we get to unbutton our. They have us button our top button on our blouse. For most of the training in third phase, we get to unbutton it, so we actually look somewhat like Marines. And then at the very end, graduation is where we get the eagle, lobe, and anchor. But yeah, so that was training for the most part.
Okay. Now, how would you characterize the group of people you were training along with?
You know, I'm not sure. I mean, we had a lot of there was people from all over. I mean, we come to find out that most people are from California or Texas, and then there's people from other places also. But I mean, it seemed to be that most people were kind of like me, and I looking back, I would say probably, you know, lower middle class kind of backgrounds, that kind of thing.
Were there many with military families?
Not that I'm aware of. I mean, we didn't. So there wasn't a whole lot of socializing.
Okay.
I really didn't get to know a lot of the people personally. I think we got like an hour at the end of the day to kind of square our things away. And for the most part, we weren't allowed to speak during that time. And on Sundays, I think it was a 4-hour block that we were actually allowed to kind of get the newspaper, use the bathroom at your leisure kind of thing. And so, and usually that's what I did. I read the newspaper and I used the bathroom. So.
Okay. Now, did you have many people drop out or have problems along the way, or did most of them go through okay?
We had a few dropouts. I think there was one guy that ran away during the first phase, and then they actually found him during the last phase, and they brought him back. I believe he got actually home, and his father convinced him to go turn himself in. And they bring you back to the platoon you were assigned to before, and then they process you out from there. We had quite a few people get recycled to us. So if you are, you know, say you get to the third phase, or you get the second phase, they'll bump you back to the beginning of a phase if you, for medical, like if you had a medical injury, you'll go to the medical platoon until you get better, and then they'll put you back in. And actually, we had a guy that I ended up going to comm school with who had gotten cellulitis, and they actually found him with that on the last day or so of the second phase. So he was actually on his way up the Reaper, which is the end hike, and then the medic found him, or the corpsman found him with a limp, and stopped him and checked it out. And they're like, "Oh, you got to go back." And he was pleading not to go back because he actually had to do second phase all over again. So the whole exercise that he had done, he had to do all over again with us. So.
All right. So now, once you finish that, now what do they do with you?
From there, I think we got like our 10 days of liberty. We got to go home, and but after that, we went to. I went to Marine Combat Training, which is if you are other than infantry, you'll go to Marine Combat Training, which is like 3 weeks, 27 days of combat training. If you're infantry, then you go to School of Infantry, SOI. And that's, I believe, a 5-week course that they send you through. And it's basically more in-depth on infantry skills. So you do a lot of bivouacking, a lot of patrolling, learning how to fire a variety of different weapon systems, that kind of thing. A lot of more classes and instructions and stuff.
Okay. All right. And then was that at Camp Pendleton or someplace else?
That was at Camp Pendleton. They have the School of Infantry and Marine Combat Training, relatively the same place out there. So we were out in the hills of Camp Pendleton doing exercise. I think for the most part, we'd go out for the week and do our training out there in the field, and then come back on the weekend for a couple days to kind of rest and refit, and then we'd go out again, and it kind of was the cycle for those 3 weeks.
Okay. All right. And then once you're done with that.
After
what?
that, yeah, after that I went to Twentynine Palms for the field radio operators course. And I'm not quite sure how long that was. I want to say that was like a 6-week course that I had gone through. And you're pretty much learning how to operate the radios, set up antennas, that kind of thing.
Okay, so where is Twentynine Palms?
Twentynine Palms is in the Mojave Desert outside of it's in Southern California, outside of San Diego, a ways, kind of between San Diego and Las Vegas there. Pretty much in the middle of nowhere. One of the largest training areas. We didn't go out into the training areas so much. We were mostly at the schoolhouse, and they had a space designated for mostly setting up antennas and doing some communication stuff. But.
Okay, and at this point, and so this is mid 2000s here. How sophisticated was the equipment you were using? I mean, did it look like stuff they used in Vietnam, or was it more better than that? Or
Yeah, so I think we later on we had gotten much more modern radio equipment in the field. In the radio operators course, we were working with Prick 104s, Prick 19s for the most part is what we were using. They had for the 104, they had a encryption device that attached to it. I forget the name of that, but you had to load the crypto on it, and then you'd set it up, field phones, that kind of thing. So a lot of the stuff was kind of older, and I'm assuming some of the stuff was kind of at least late Vietnam era equipment. The schoolhouse didn't get the best equipment, I think, either. But yeah, it wasn't nothing modern. Later on, we started getting much better equipment where there wasn't an external kind of encryption thing. It was all built in, or it could cover a lot of different frequency wavelengths. The 104 was a high frequency radio, and the 19 was a VHF radio, and then we also had the Prick 113, which is UHF. So if you wanted to cover different spectrums, depending on what how you're trying to communicate, you had to use a different radio for each one.
okay, all right. And then what kinds of sort of applications were you learning? Were you being taught to do particular kinds of things, whether it's communicating with aircraft or artillery or other things?
I think we covered radio messages, because there's some standard messages. Field artillery is one of those things where they definitely have a standard message system that they use, and I think we touched on that. Most of it was just learning how to put in the frequencies for the radios, set up the radios for communications. And we learned how to, if you want to talk with a aircraft, you want to use the UHF radio. If you're going to be talking with in close proximity, you use the VHF radio, usually for ground troops and stuff like that for movement. And then if you want to talk for longer range, then you use the HF radios. And that was kind of the extent of it. There was actually quite a bit on kind of numbers and the frequency ranges and kind of the characteristics and capabilities of the equipment, which ended up not being that important. But that's what they taught anyways.
Okay. All right. And then having finished this, do you now get assigned to a unit, or do you have more training?
Yeah, no, I ended up graduating first in the class, so I had gotten a meritorious promotion to Lance Corporal, and then I also got to first pick at duty station, so they get the list of all the duty stations, and I get to take a pick. And I ended up picking a unit in Japan, and that's kind of all they gave us, was you go to Japan, go to the East Coast, go to the West Coast. At the last minute, they actually gave me the option to go to Cuba, to Guantanamo Bay for a year, and I passed it up. I had wanted to go to Japan. I thought that'd be a good time there.
All right, and so that is where you went then?
Yes.
Okay, and now what unit were you assigned to there?
And when I got there, I was assigned to 1st Stinger Battery, or 1st LAD, Low Altitude Air Defense. I think they're interchangeable for the most part. But so it's a part of the air wing, and they focus on intercepting low-flying aircraft to shoot them down, essentially. And I think I went there with 5 other guys that were in the radio operators course with me. We all got to the unit at the same time.
Okay. Now, where was the unit based?
That was on Futenma on Okinawa.
Okay. All right. And now, can you kind of describe what that base was like and what you were doing?
Yep. So Futenma was the air base. So mostly air wings. So on Japan, they Camp Butler, I think, is the system of camps that they have on Okinawa. And so down the road was Foster, and then they had Schwab up north, and they had a bunch of other places. And it kind of depended on what you did. So the air wing was on Futenma, and they had the airstrip there. Foster was the logistics. So if you were, a surface support guy, you were on Foster, and if you were infantry, you were probably up at Schwab somewhere. But for us, it kind of was we ended up picking up a day-to-day routine with training and stuff. Our barracks was on one side of the flight line, and they had a bus system that would kind of shuttle back and forth. We'd hop on the bus, and we'd have to be back after PT in the morning, our physical training in the morning. We'd generally every day do a 3 to 5 mile run or something like that. So I was attached to the headquarters. It was a company-sized unit, and I was attached to the headquarters in the comm shop, and they had 2 platoons of gunners, and I believe 30 to 40 people, gunners in each of the platoons. And they would attach radio operators to the platoons as needed. So usually there'd be 1 or 2 radio operators assigned to a platoon, and if they were going to go out to do some sort of training or something like that, they might attach 1 or 2 more. And our day-to-day was maintenance on the radios, stocking the platoons with the radios that they needed and things like that if they were doing training exercise. And then we'd do our own training and stuff when we were able, so setting up antennas. And
Would you sometimes go out with the platoons on their exercises, or did you just stay in the headquarters?
Well, we would go out usually, for the most part, so the platoons went out and did some independent training. For the most part, it was the company would do company-wide training. On Okinawa, it's difficult to get, there's limited training areas and stuff. So when they do get a training area, it's usually the whole company going. And it'd usually be for about a week or so that we'd go out. And that would, maybe once every couple months we'd go out and do something like that. And, we'd set up the headquarters radio command posts with radios and stuff. We'd sit there and monitor radios, and we'd set up a rotating watch. And because we had the field phones, we had all of our radios were remote accessed. So we'd have our wire running to our remote sets, and then our antennas and the actual radio systems, sometimes a half mile away. And we'd have field phones running so we can communicate between the two. And then we'd be handling traffic from the gunners. And they mostly do practice with spotting aircraft. So someone would call in saying, hey, there's a aircraft flying this direction, and they'd have to identify it, and they'd call in, report it, and then engage or disengage or something like that.
Okay. Now, did you have a sense of what all of this was directed toward? Was there a likely enemy in mind? Is it the Chinese there, or not really sure?
And that was kind of one of the points that that had kind of been in discussion, especially with a lot of the officers and stuff, was kind of the relevance of the Stingers. Mostly because in most theaters the U.S. has air superiority, so it's not like anyone's going to be flying aircraft through. And then there was a number of other, missile systems that could be employed to that effect also. So, and I believe they actually, they may have disbanded them altogether by now. I know there had been talk about that. And I think it kind of goes back to kind of the the Cold War era, you know, Russian enemy or Chinese enemy, kind of the big powers and stuff, where the U.S. may not necessarily have air superiority.
Yeah, so it's really a traditional weapons system in some ways, or at least one geared toward a conventional war.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Now, how long did you wind up staying in Okinawa?
I was there for 2 years, and that's generally how long a tour is going to be in Okinawa. If you're married and are doing an unaccompanied tour, then they do 1-year tours. I did 2 years, and while I was there, I think towards my last, in my second year, I ended up getting attached to the 31st MEU. So I was assigned to one of the platoons, and that platoon was, or there was a detachment made from one of the platoons, and then I was attached to the detachment.
You said 31st MEU. What does MEU mean?
Marine Expeditionary Unit. So essentially, it's a helo-deck carrier, and then they have 2 other ships that go along with it. And we pretty much toured the South Pacific doing training. I think one of the notable things is we were actually pulling into, I believe, Subic Bay in the Philippines. I think it's in the Philippines. We were supposed to actually, it was just, I think, supposed to be a Liberty port that we were going in for. And as we were pulling up, we were inches away, and then we started backing up. There was a mudslide in Leyte, so we went over there, and we helped with relief efforts there. And that was, I think, the most notable event that we participated in with that MEU.
Okay. And then when that was going on, the relief effort was going on, what were you doing?
So what we ended up doing, we were in charge of the landing zone. So they had the mudslide area where they were digging for survivors. And I believe there's a school that had a whole village, I think, was engulfed with mud. And just outside of that area, they had set up a landing zone in one of the villages right next to it. And we were landing in helicopters for, you know, food and water and that kind of stuff. Actually, there was one of the locals there was a retired Navy and owned a number of houses in the Philippines, and he opened up his house, which was just across from the landing zone that we had, and allowed us to use that as the headquarters for the humanitarian mission. But we would be out in the field, you know, monitoring the radios, landing in helicopters. I think we had space, depending on the aircraft. 53s, we could land 1 at a time. 46s, we could land 2 at a time. That's kind of the space we had. Yeah, that's what I was doing for the most part.
Okay. Now, when you were on Okinawa, I mean, did you get off the base very much and go anywhere?
We did. At that time, we could get off the base. Right now, I think they're pretty much not allowed to go anywhere in Okinawa. They had a Liberty card system at the time, so when you get there, you have a red card, which means you have to be back by midnight. And normally you have that for a year, unless you're a corporal, then you can pick. There's all kinds of rules, and it depends on the unit you're with, kind of what they allow. But I eventually got my gold card, and then I could go out 24 hours, and that kind of remained. There was sometimes someone would do something on one of the bases, and then they would pull everyone's Liberty cards. So you have to stay, and that usually lasts about a week or so, and then they'd reissue cards. But yeah, I got to go out quite a bit, mostly the areas outside of Futenma and Foster. I think my second year, one of my buddies had gotten a car, and so we were able to kind of travel around the island a bit more.
Okay. Now, at times there's been a lot of tension between American military personnel in Okinawa and the locals. I mean, were you aware of that at the time, or was any of that going on?
I mean, so areas right outside of base were very accommodating for the military, mostly because they were businesses and they relied on the military.
Right.
And you know, I didn't feel any tension or anything with the locals. Now there were places you'd go and they said no Americans can go, no gaijin. But I didn't feel that was a tension thing. I felt that was more kind of their want to preserve kind of what they got going on. And it wasn't that they didn't want us there, they just didn't want us at their place of business or whatever. But you know, most people I spoke to, especially the younger people going out to the bars and stuff, you talk to locals, and you know, I never felt that there was any kind of animosity or anything.
Oh, I guess a lot of it may have been at times, a lot of the problems were the American personnel just sort of misbehaving or getting drunk or other things like that, rather than things being really directed at them by the locals. So if you were nice, they were nice, and
yeah, and there were, and at times there were protests right outside of the base and stuff like that, and that would usually be on, be for a day or two that would go on, and I'd always, so I had heard that that a lot of the push to get the bases out was not necessarily from Okinawa itself, but from mainland Japan, not wanting the Americans there, but the Okinawans actually preferred it, and I think it was a lot had to do with the economy and stuff, because there was the U.S. personnel brought all this money, and I can imagine them closing down all the bases there, and then pretty much all the businesses right outside of the bases are going to have to shut down because they won't have any business.
All right, okay. So once you get through that first sort of 2 years assignment, what do you get next?
From there, I get assigned to 2-5, and so by that time, I had actually contacted my monitor, which assigns where people go, and I told him, well, I want to go infantry because, and I want to go to a unit that's going to be deploying soon. I had hoped that I would deploy, and I got the 31st Mu, and that's somewhat of a deployment. But Iraq was going on. There were people in Iraq, and that's kind of where I wanted to go. So I told the monitor I want to go to the next unit that's going to be deploying. So I ended up getting assigned to 2-5, which is in Camp Pendleton, San Mateo, which is north of Camp Pendleton, and I get there, and they're pretty much on a deployment cycle where they will deploy for 7 months, and they have, I think, about 12 months that they're back to rest, refit, and then get ready for another deployment. Is kind of the cycle that they're on. And by that time, we were the buildup was just starting. So actually, we ended up deploying in the beginning of 2007, and that's, I think we were kind of one of the initial units for deployment when they were trying to expand the areas. We ended up deploying to Ramadi, and we took over an Army unit's AO, and then we actually got a smaller portion of what they were covering, and then other units kind of filled in the gaps. So they were putting more units in that one space.
Is this part of what got referred to as the surge, where the number of American ground troops was getting expanded?
Yes.
All right. Now, how do they, so I guess, what sort of preparation do you get for going over to Iraq while this unit's gearing up to go? What's happening?
So for us, it was a lot of, we do, so they for the battalion, they do training phases, and it's, I mean, it was like that for the Mu too, because we did training buildups for that, where you work on individual training, and then you do unit level, and then you do company, and then battalion level, and then before you go on the Mu, then you do a Mu exercise where it's everyone working together to train and qualify for the Mu. For 2-5, that was the same kind of thing. So individual training, making sure you have your rifle quality, your PFTs up, and your individual. Then you're focusing on maybe your squad or your company training exercises, and then eventually you'll start doing battalion exercises. And then we do culminating event in Twentynine Palms. So I get to go back to Twentynine Palms, yay! And do Mojave Viper, which is a month-long exercise in the desert where they have mock villages and stuff like that. And in that, they also do kind of the that kind of training where you start with platoon level, then company, and then battalion level exercises within that month.
Okay. And was this geared specifically for Iraq at that point?
It was, yeah. It was. They had native speakers there in mock villages doing patrols, and they had, by that time they had. I believe they were doing the like simulated explosions and stuff, and they'd have makeup teams out there, you know, doing injuries and stuff like that. So they at that time they were trying to make it as realistic as possible to prepare specifically for Iraq.
Okay. Now, had your unit deployed to Iraq already? Had they been there?
Yeah, so the unit, a lot of the guys had already been to Iraq in 2006. They were there, so they were on the previous cycle. And 2006 was a really intense time for Iraq, especially in Ramadi, where a lot of the heaviest fighting was. So there was a number of guys that had had combat experience and kind of had gone through that day-to-day routine. Yeah, so there was a lot of veterans, you know, in the units that we were with. So it was pretty veteran heavy going in.
All right. Now, how did they get you out to Iraq?
I think it was, I want to say Anderson, which is north of Pendleton. We would bus up there, and then we take a commercial flight over to, I think, Bangor, Maine, and then we hop another flight into Kuwait, and then from Kuwait we bus to a receiving base there, and that's where we get our ammo and a lot of other stuff. I think they give us like 3 days for acclimatization for the weather and stuff, and then from there we end up I think C-17, either C-17 or C-130 into Iraq, and I'm not sure which base we flew in, but we flew into one of those bases, and then from there we take helicopters into whatever sub base we're going into and stuff like that. So.
Okay. So then where do you wind up getting sent to?
So we get sent to Ramadi, and we're pretty much assigned to the city itself. So when I got there, when I got there, I was assigned to headquarters company. Headquarters company. I was with the comm shop and weapons company. Each of the companies had radio operators assigned to them. Weapons company being having the most radio systems because they are mobile. They would have more radio operators. Well, one of the radio operators broke their arm the weekend before they deployed, so they were down a man. And I actually talked to my lieutenant. I said I was a corporal at the time, and I talked to my lieutenant. I said, "Hey, if there's a slot for one of the companies, that's where I want to go." And when we got into country, he asked me if I still wanted to go, and I said yes. So I ended up getting assigned to weapons company, where I was the company radio operator. There was someone that was the company radio operator before me, but I took over his spot because I was senior. Right. So we get there, and we're in charge of southern Ramadi. So we got it's actually considered, I think it's one of the poorer sections of Ramadi, the south west, and then there's farmland to the south. That's kind of, you have city and then farmland is essentially how it is split up.
All right. Okay. Now, weapons company, what kind of weapon systems do they have?
So weapons company, heavy machine guns, so 50 cals, Mark 19s, which I actually don't think they even took out because using machine grenade launchers is probably not the thing they wanted to do. Right. So 50 cals for the most part. In a lot of ways, so they were in charge of the area operations, but they also ran a logistics through to other companies and stuff because they had all the vehicles. Now, because when we got to Ramadi, we took over for an Army unit, and they didn't do any dismounted patrols. All their patrols were mounted patrols.
Okay.
And this was right before they, I guess the sheikhs in the area decided, hey, we should stop fighting the Americans and kind of start cooperating. And I think that happened about a month, maybe a month and a half into our deployment is when that transition took place. Because it actually, when we got there, there was still quite a bit of fighting going on. And then about a month and a half into it, everything just kind of stopped. So but when we got in, we said we're going to do dismounted patrols. That way we can engage with the populace and stuff, and have a stronger presence in the city. And we also did, so the Army units also had one main base, and that was pretty much it. And then we broke down all of our companies into platoons and had them occupy buildings. So we occupied a Cop Iron, I believe it was called, and in the southwest, it was like a building compound that the headquarters controlled. And then down the road, there was 2 other outposts that we also controlled for weapons company alone. And then each of the other companies also did that. So there would be, I think Falcon was another cop that they had, and they broke out into other outposts. So a platoon would find an abandoned building, and they pretty much set that up as a compound. So they're more dispersed throughout the city, covering larger areas.
Yeah, because it was sort of part of the logic of the surge strategy was to get into the community, make connections, show a presence, and then stay there, and not just stay hidden in your vehicles or in the big bases.
Yeah, no, we were doing daily patrols out in the community and stuff. Some days we would actually get, so we do clearing operations, and if we did clearing operations, so we'd go through and pretty much search, entire sections of the city that we covered. And if we were doing that, we'd also coincide that with food and water supplies. So we'd bring in food and water supplies. So we're handing out food and water to kind of get people to come out of their houses so we can go in there and search their houses, essentially is what we were doing. And, bags of flour and rice, that kind of stuff we would be handing out. We'd coordinate with the community leaders and let them know what was going on, so they can organize how they wanted to distribute the food and stuff, because so there wasn't like a mad grab for food and stuff. And a lot of it was like large bags of flour, stuff like that, and they would know best how to kind of distribute that to their village and stuff.
All right. Now, you mentioned at the beginning there was still a lot of fighting going on. I mean, were your people getting directly engaged, and were there casualties, or?
We did not have any casualties. I'm trying to. I think we might have had one guy in the battalion that stepped on an IED and lost a leg, but I think that we had no deaths. With the time we were there. With fighting and stuff, there'd be firefights. It was kind of difficult and that was one of the things that was most difficult, I think, when there was fighting going on, is that a lot of the fighting was they'd shoot from a distance, and then they'd move, so it was hard to identify where firing was coming from. And when we were going in, it was all about hearts and minds. So it was, if you can't identify the target, then don't shoot in that direction. And that's kind of what had been harped on us, is you have to identify what you're shooting at before you start shooting. So if you get shots and you look in that direction and you're looking where you think you hear it coming from, and you start trying to find it, by that time they're moving to another location and shooting from there. So you're kind of trying to figure out where this firing's coming from. So that was one of the difficult things. A lot of times you get pop shots going on a patrol. You'd get a couple of shots, and then you'd hear nothing at all after that. And that was for the most part. And even after a lot of the fighting stopped, once a week or so you'd get shots. If you're doing a mounted convoy, you might get shots at the convoy from a distance. And again, you couldn't identify where a single shot's coming from. You just kind of look around and throw your hands up and say, oh, I guess we're just going to keep moving.
Okay. What impression did you have of the Iraqi civilians in the area to the extent that you saw them?
The area we were at, a lot of poor people. Further in the city, there were a lot of nice buildings and stuff. The buildings we're at were kind of bare bones, single room kind of shack looking building. They're all concrete buildings out in the rural area, which there was kind of like here's city, here's rural area. There was some more makeshift stuff going on. But yeah, mostly poor. So after we had started building up out there, we also started, that's when they started implementing the Iraqi Army, Iraqi police, and we had our MIT and PIT teams for police training and the Army training. And pretty much what the deal was stop fighting the Americans and join the police or the Iraqi Army. So it seemed that it was a money thing. I had talked. We had so we had a MIT team, which is the military advising and training team, and we had a section on Cop Iron that was for the Iraqi Army, where they would come in and do training and stuff. And I had talked to some of those Iraqis. And we asked them, it's like, oh, they just joined the Army. What were you doing before then? It's like, oh, we were placing IEDs on the road, a week ago. And it just seemed that the thing was, it wasn't about, they had some sort of hatred for anyone. It was mostly a money thing. They would get paid to go put in IEDs. Now they're getting paid to be in the Iraqi Army. And there was another thing with the Iraqi Army and Iraqi police. So the Iraqi police were generally local from the area, and the Iraqi Army was generally could be from all locations, all over Iraq, and they'd relocate them and stuff. So you'd get that Shia Sunni tension between it, because a lot of times the local population would be one, and they'd be importing via the Iraqi Army, the opposite group. So there were tensions between, and I'm pretty sure there were shots fired between the Iraqi Army and Iraqi police on several occasions, that kind of thing going on. So there's, when you have someone that you talk to and they're saying that they used to plant IEDs in, there's, and by that time I think there was already reports on friendly fire between Iraqi Army, Iraqi police, and U.S. Forces. So it's you never let your guard down, even when you're supposed to be on the same side, kind of thing.
Now, did you also have interpreters assigned to you that were?
We had, there were interpreters with the unit, and the MIT and PIT teams, they obviously had interpreters. I didn't speak. I spoke every once in a while to interpreters, but for the most part, I didn't do a whole lot of engaging with the local population. For the most part, we do. I was the company RO, so if our company commander went on and needed to do a meeting with local sheikhs or whatever, we'd have an interpreter go with us, and he would wander off. That's how our company commander was. He would wander off onto a patrol, and he'd just grab his stuff. It's like, hey, we need to do this meeting, and he'd just start walking off. And while we're like prepping for a actual patrol, because we're in the military, he would just kind of walk to wherever he's going, and we would have to patrol around him, because he would be walking, and he'd just like, oh, let's go this way now, and kind of divert wherever he wanted to go.
Okay. How effective a commander was he?
I think he was fine. you know, maybe a little arrogant in that way. You know, we would all be suited up and stuff, flak and Kevlar, and he'd walk out and he'd take his Kevlar off and kind of wander around and checking, you know, things out. And, you know, he seemed to be a great guy. I talked to him on several occasions. He wasn't a hard ass or anything. But at the same time, it's kind of one of those things where, you know, I've always been kind of lead by example kind of thing. It's like you want your guys to wear their flak and Kevlars. You should probably wear your flak Kevlar when you're going out. And, you know, luckily nothing happened. I mean, at the time, IEDs were out, mostly targeting vehicles. You know, it wasn't to the point where we were using, you know, metal detectors or anything like that. So it wasn't that serious a threat. But, you know, those things had happened before. And it was kind of one of those things like, you know, you are the commander, you should probably be in line, you know, with the patrol and stuff like that, you know, or at least let the point man know you're going to be diverting, because our point man would be going forward and he'd have to keep turning around to make sure that he was going the direction the commander was going, which was a pain because we'd have to yell out, "Hey, point man, we're turning left now."
All right. Now, what kind of living conditions did you have there?
So we were occupying these pretty much blown out buildings. There was a lot of rubble damage. They had rigged up lighting, electrical systems, and they were run on generators. The building I occupied, they had brought in, you know, beds, little twin-size beds that we slept on if I got sleep. I was actually doing quite a lot, because I was the radio operator, so that automatically made me an electrician also. So anything that was a machine, I had to do some work on. So frequently the lighting system would get jacked up, or someone wanted to put in new lighting, so I'd have to grab lights and wire and try to rig something. And I'm not the best with electricity. I'm kind of afraid of electricity because it can hurt you. And I got shocked a number of times doing that. But yeah, it was me. We had a data guy with us because we were running Sipper and NipperNet, which is the pretty much the internet service out there. We had a satellite dish that we'd point and get, so we were able to get internet out there on a small scale, anyways, for operations stuff. So we had a guy running that in case it went down. And then we had people kind of come and go depending on what they did. We kind of were a transient space that we occupied. We had a HET guy, which is a human intelligence guy, come out and was doing operations out of there for a while. We had a record guy that stayed with us for quite a while. We had started getting more IED strikes on vehicles, so the location we were at was best to have him operate out of. And because we were running all the convoys, so any logistics convoys we'd run, so they had the record there because he could jump. They can organize the logistics convoy and he'd jump on there.
Okay. And how well fortified was the compound?
It was pretty. I mean, the compound was walled, and then they, you know, as we were there, we were building on what was there before us. So there was already cement structures in some locations. As we were there longer, they were building even more, so we'd get more concrete barriers. We'd put those up, these giant T barriers. We had guard posts at different locations, and they would, you know, the battalion XO would come by and say, "Let's raise this roof," and we'd have to take the roof off and throw more sandbags on it and make it taller. You know, so it was pretty well fortified. While we were in the compound, flat and Kevlar, we can walk around pretty much at ease for the most part. I did antennas and stuff, so all my antennas were on the roof, and if anything happened, I'd go up there. And I'm supposed to have a flat and Kevlar, but most times I wouldn't, because climbing a building and maneuvering antennas with a flat Kevlar is really a pain in the butt. I think I had gotten pop shots up there several times. I don't think anything landed close, anyways. But I mean, it was nerve-wracking because it was on the top of one of the biggest buildings in the area. So standing up there, maneuvering this antenna, which stretches another 30 feet in the air, you're kind of saying, "Please shoot me."
Right. Yep. Okay. Now, did they have air conditioning on a base like this anywhere, or was it all just open?
I think they did have AC units that they were getting in. I know the second tour in Iraq they had AC units. I think we had the AC unit. I think they had AC units by then.
And were those just being places where you had computer equipment, or were they sleeping areas, or?
The COC, the command center, they would have ACs there. I don't recall if our room had AC. I think it did, and the ACs would go out a lot of times, so they have to be replaced often. And because the dust, they just malfunction, they break down. So you'd have it for a while and it busts, and you have to try to figure something out. So I think we ended up, at least halfway through, I think we ended up getting air conditioning units. I mean, I didn't spend a whole lot of time in the living space. I mean, a lot of people talk about downtime and stuff like that, but I tried to, I stayed busy. I was the radio operator for the company, weapons company, which had the ability to maneuver around the whole AO pretty easily because we had vehicles. So I was running on all the logistics convoys, and those would occur every day, every other day. I do patrols with any company commander, any patrols the company commander went on, I was a part of that. But I also did any wrecker runs anytime there was an IED strike and they need to send a wrecker out there to recover the vehicle. I'd run those, and then anytime communications that someone needed support at one of the other outposts, I'd pretty much go into the COC, who's on patrol right now, hey, call them, tell them to swing by here and take me over to this other location and fix that. And that was for our company, but also for the other companies, because I was senior than some of the radio operators in some of the other companies. I frequently get requests to go over to other companies and help them with their communications. So I would be doing that also. So I pretty much, if something was going on, I was trying to be involved in it.
Okay. So how much sleep did you get?
I didn't get a lot of sleep. And then, I mean, on top of that, when I did get sleep, there was a field phone from the COC to my room in case communications went down in the COC, because I'd also have to maintain those communications. I mean, luckily I didn't have to stand radio watch in the COC. They had the platoons did rotating shifts. They would have a platoon that was patrolling, a platoon that was in kind of working party mode, and then you have another that was kind of on a relaxed schedule, and they'd rotate through those, so that they had those maintained. But if it went down, and a lot of times they'd call and say, hey, the radios aren't working anymore. I was like, did you change the batteries? And they'd say, no. It's like, well, change the batteries, and then give me a call. And they'd change the batteries, and they'd call me and say, hey, everything's fine. But I mean, I'd get calls like that, all hours of the night also. So.
Okay. You mentioned the dust being a problem for the air conditioners. Did it cause problems for other stuff too?
Yeah, I mean, radios is one of those things, clean connections and stuff like that. That'd be one of those things where I'd get calls about radios and stuff, and I was like, well, you need to clean them. You need to take them out and clean the ports. We'd go through handsets quite often, just because the dust and everything. Weapons would have to be cleaned on a regular basis. The M16, we had the M16 A2, and they are not the best when dirty. They have to be regularly cleaned. So that was another thing with the dust. And our base, they had a staging area for vehicles, and they had what they call moon dust, which is the very fine powder, and it would be about a half a foot to a foot deep, and you'd be trudging through this thin powder. And that stuff gets everywhere, and if the wind picks up, then it blows it everywhere. And then, in the off chance that it rains, and then you're walking around in a foot of mud, and caking your boots and stuff like that. So.
Okay. Now, over the course, so how long was that tour?
That was 7 months.
7 months, okay. Now, over the course of that time, did you feel like you had made progress or were accomplishing the mission, or did it seem like you're just going in circles?
It sort of seemed, it's hard to tell because, they by the time we left, we had the Iraqi police and Iraqi army in the area were pretty much up and running. I mean, there were problems here and there, definitely. We had also started working on public works projects and stuff like that, so employing people to clean the streets, that kind of thing. So, I mean, there was progress in that regard, but at the same time, it's hard to tell from where I was at anyways. By that time, I was just kind of in my routine of, trying to get things done.
So you're just there and doing your job and not worrying too much about bigger picture.
Yeah, at that time in my career, big picture was not on my radar for the most part. It was just, I got a job to do and this is what I'm doing.
All right. So now we get kind of late in 2007, that tour comes to an end. Are there any other particular events or incidents or things from that first tour that kind of stand out for you that you haven't talked about yet?
No, well, so there was, I don't know, the Battle of Donkey Island, which was this island in the south of the city, and they had gotten intelligence reports of like 50 enemies occupying this reed-covered island. It wasn't a big island. I don't even know if 50 people could possibly occupy the place. But they had worked on clearing the brush from there, and then they did like a company push through the area. And I believe it was on like the 4th of July or the 3rd of July. It was right around the 4th of July. And it was, I think, like 140 degrees out. And they decided to do this in the middle of the day. And we do this push across this farmland. And they had vehicles kind of behind, following up. And we're like online, trying to push out this area. No engagement at all. And I think we lost more people. We didn't lose them, but more people went down from heat exhaustion that day than anything. I mean, we had air on station, stuff like that. We had, a lot of support on this mission, and I don't think anything really came of it for the most part.
So somebody somewhere was pulling your leg.
Yeah, I guess so. I was like, what is going on here?
Okay. All right. So now late 2007, now you rotate back home. And at this point, do you have about 1 year left on your original enlistment, or had you already decided to stay in? Or
yeah. So when I was in Iraq, I talked to my I'm trying to. I ended up talking to my monitor at some point in time when I was in Iraq, and I might have had emailed him or was talking to a third party or something, but I had been communicating to him because my enlistment was coming up, and actually they were doing reenlistment bonuses at that point. So I was definitely going to reenlist because I think I got like $30,000 for reenlistment. And again, I told them, I want to get back here as soon as possible. This is why I was in Iraq still. And so I want to go to the next unit that's deploying. Actually, one of the ANGLICOs, I think it was first ANGLICO, was actually doing operations in our area for a week or so, and they were actually staying in our building. And I had been talking to them. And so I talked to the monitor, and I said, hey, what's up with these guys? Can I go here? He said, yeah. It's like, well, which one do you want to go to? Because they have 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th ANGLICO, I think, and they're on he said that first ANGLICO was going to be deploying again soon. They're pretty much on a on-off deployment cycle, so they go for 7 months, they're back for 7 months, they go, and they are kind of going back and forth that way. It's like, well, that's where I want to go. And so I had gotten orders there while I was in Iraq to go there. So I got back and was with 2-5 for maybe a couple more months, and then I moved. First ANGLICO was actually just down the road. So.
Okay, so back at Camp Pendleton?
Yep.
Okay, now explain what ANGLICO is.
So Air Naval Gunfire Liaison Company.
Okay.
They do fire support, so surface fires and air support. Mostly, I think 50% of the unit is officers, and we get pilots, no-glows, which are naval gun officers of some sort, and artillery officers and infantry officers. And they run teams, and they do small teams that they're primarily working with foreign militaries or units that do not have, that need our capabilities or the U.S. capabilities that don't have them. Or like special forces units, U.S. special forces units that need a specialized air support. They need someone dedicated for air support because that's all we do. So, and we work in, they have small teams, so generally 4 or 5 man teams, and they have 2 or 3 of them assigned to a section, and then like 2 or 3 of those assigned to a platoon, and then 2 of those in the company, in the headquarters company. And I got there, I was assigned to a fire team, or a fire power control team, which was we had 5 man teams by then. So it was 2 forward observers, or 2 scout observers, radio operator, and an officer of some sort. So 4 people actually. And our officer was an F-18 pilot. Yeah, and we help provide fire support, so that's all we kind of train on.
Now then, when you join them with Camp Pendleton, are you kind of gearing up for the next rotation over to Iraq?
Yeah, when I get there, they're already kind of in the stages of preparation. They already knew where they were going to be going, or that they were going to be going, because all the units get detached to other units throughout the area. So there's no like central, like everyone's in this area. They're all over. So in Iraq, they'd be all over Iraq dispersed. And they don't run a traditional workup or training plan for Iraq like the infantry battalions do with Mojave Viper and that kind of thing. They do whatever training with who they're going to be working with. I'm trying to think. I'm not sure what we did for. Yeah, I'm not sure what we did for our workup. We might have gone to Twentynine Palms for some sort of exercise, but I don't remember going with them.
Okay.
We had to have done something though.
All right. About how long did you have between deployments?
I think it was a year. No. So October I got back, and then I went back in March. So I was October, November, December, January, February, March. 5 months between deployments.
Yeah. So not too long a time necessarily to just hang around and have that much of a routine necessarily while you're there. All right. Now, why had you been eager to go back as soon as possible?
That's why I joined for the most part. So that's what I wanted to do. With deployment, there's it kind of simplifies things. I mean, when you're back, you got bills and you got family and friends you're dealing with in Iraq or even Afghanistan. You just worry about the mission, and things are a little clearer in that way. And you're just busy, and I enjoy doing that. I was doing my job. I was doing what I signed up to do. So.
Okay. Now, were you married at this time, or?
No. No.
Okay. You probably ought to know what year you got married, but
Well, I was married twice, so.
Okay. All right.
There was another marriage in there. That's right.
All right. So you've got, but anyway, but still, there was enough life intervening when you're back home that you noticed that kind of thing. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So now, going back over then, second time. So now, what year is that? Is that 08 you're going over? Or?
Yes.
Okay. Is it the same process as before, or do you do something different?
No, the in process is pretty much the same. We ended up flying into Kuwait. We stayed there. We get our ammunition and stuff like that. What was the big difference was we were, instead of being in Ramadi, we were in northwest Iraq. So our firepower control team was assigned to an Iraqi army unit, I think a battalion, north of Al-Qaim, which I think was like 40 kilometers north. And it was just kind of in the middle of nowhere. They built this kind of base out there. And their mission was to control traffic or stop Al-Qaeda from moving between Syria and Iraq. So we were pretty much doing patrols in open desert, nothing for miles and miles. So we were doing everything was mounted. We would drive out, and a lot of times we'd do 2 or 3 day patrols out into the desert, and we'd be attached with. So there was a MIT team, which was helping advise and train the Iraqi army, and then there was us, and we were attached to the Iraqi army to provide air support for the most part, because there's no artillery out there or anything. It was all air support. So we'd get air on station at different times, and we'd scope out places of possible interest before we went out into the area.
Okay. And were you finding much?
No, not a lot. We would get tips on caches and things like that. So we found a number of weapons caches. A lot of them were really old weapons caches. So I'm assuming that the people who told us about them probably put them there in the first place a long time ago, and that's why they knew they were there. That would happen frequently, where we'd get tips on IEDs, because that was another thing, because we'd have to go down, maybe once a month, we'd go down to Al-Qaim, which was a 40-kilometer movement to get down there to the city so we can resupply, get repairs on vehicles and that kind of thing. We'd have people Iraqis that would point out IEDs and stuff. And a lot of times it'd be like, well, how the heck did you know that was there? It's like there was no indicator, and it's not on the beaten path. It's not like you're wandering by and sitting in front of you. It's like off the side somewhere that you wouldn't know unless you actually placed it there. So I mean, we'd come into that quite a bit, and we're pretty sure a lot of people that are spotting these actually had placed them there at some point or another and just knew that they were there. And I think the same was for the weapons caches for the most part. So yeah, we'd stop. We'd drive right through the desert. We'd stop and talk to locals. A lot of Bedouins out there. So people would pop up their tents. There was a camel trade. So they had caravans that would go back and forth, and we'd stop, and there'd be hundreds of camels moving by. So we'd wait, and we'd stop and talk to the whoever was running the caravan. And they'd always ask us, "You want to ride the camel?" It's like, "No, we don't want to ride the camel, but thank you." But yeah, not a whole lot going on out there.
And what impression did you have of the Iraqi army unit you were with?
So some of the officers that had been around a while, some of the senior guys, they had been around for a long time, and they, most likely were fighting when they were, fighting Iran. So they had been around a while. A lot of the new guys, not a lot of discipline, that's for sure. And that was one of the things. By that time, they had you had some guys, cell phones, and they'd be sitting there, and we'd doing some training or something out, and people would be on cell phones and stuff. And it's like,
It's like teaching a class.
yeah. But but some of the senior guys and stuff, they would be hesitant to take advice and stuff like that. It's like, they had been around the block and they don't need our advice, kind of thing. Some would be more accepting. But yeah, I on the lower levels, I don't think a lot of them took it serious. I think it was a paycheck for them, and they were coming to get paid for the most part, and they were trying to stay out of harm's way as much as possible.
But at this stage, there wasn't a whole lot of harm necessarily.
Yeah, no, not where we were at.
Okay. Now, aside from the Bedouin, do you see any civilians, or only in the town, or?
No, not really. There was a few towns that we would go through, mostly on our way to El Qaim, because it was a larger town. I think they had a train station and a power plant right outside of there. But there's small villages and stuff we passed through along the way. So we'd see civilians, but we weren't engaging with those because that was not part of the area that we were covering. We were just transiting through. So no real engagement with the Iraqis at this point.
Now, this time around, did you have any more of a sense of the larger scope of the war, of what was happening, or were you again just kind of doing your job and not worrying about the rest of it?
No, I knew I had been following the news for the most part, and I knew when the previous deployment we were doing the surge that this was part of the surge, and that's kind of what we were. And I knew at the second deployment that we were at a point where a lot of the fighting had kind of just died off in that way. A lot of it went from engaging in the city and stuff, and just focusing on IEDs and IED makers were the largest threat, and they were getting better at making IEDs and making more powerful, which is why the military was starting to transition over to the MRAPs over the Humvees. We had Humvees at that time, and I think they had just started implementing the mine-resistant vehicles because they were making IEDs that could blow up Humvees. So I understood that was going on, that the threats were kind of changing, and it seemed everything that we were doing, there was some sort of response to it, and then we'd have to, it was kind of back and forth. They figure something out to get past our defenses, or to hit us, and then we figure out a way to prevent it, and then they figure something new to get around that. So IEDs has always been like a progressive thing, where they go from wire command detonation to remote control detonation, where they'd have cell phones or the Motorola base stations connected, so these wireless phones that have like extremely long distances that they can do. And then we started implementing the chameleon defender systems, which would block radio signals around the vehicles, so it created a bubble. So if they press the button, the radio signal wouldn't get to the ID they're trying to detonate. But then they'd go back to try pressure plate ones again, or they'd do a combination of remote and wire commanded. You know, they were getting better at making homemade explosives, so they were starting to add additional chemicals into their explosives to make them more powerful, or they, you know, depending on who they were targeting, whether they were going to do personnel, IEDs, or, you know, for vehicles, stuff like that. And this, by that time, they were also doing a lot of secondary stuff. So they'd have initial blast, and then they'd have secondary ones off to the side. So these were threats we were all aware of. Where we were at, the biggest threat was going into Al-Qaim, because it was, you know, became a large, going into a more urban area, and there was quite a bit of traffic on the roads we were traveling. Our thing in Iraq, anyways, it was drive as fast as you can, and hopefully the blast will leave you behind, or you will leave the blast behind, kind of thing. So we were pushing, you know, 55, 60 miles an hour down roads to get where we were going. In Afghanistan, everything was like 4 or 5 miles an hour. Anytime you traveled anywhere, it was really slow, because you'd have IEDs were a much bigger threat there, and it was you'd have EOD teams and route clearance teams in front of you, which would do a snail's pace to get anywhere.
Right. Okay. So with Iraq, I mean, on some level, in a conventional sense, you sort of had the upper hand, but there was still an enemy out there. They were still active. There were still threats.
Yes.
Okay. All right. And again, with this second tour, again, are there particular aspects of that stand out for you or are distinctive?
No, I mean, so I think there was a murder of some official while we were out there. So we went to investigate. The Iraqi police went there and did their investigation, but we went to assist with that in some capacity. You know, I don't remember a whole lot. I think we were doing a patrol in the desert, and we came across, because out on the outskirts towards the border, they had like a border teams out there, and the border team was investigating some murder, and so we get to this compound in the middle of the desert kind of area, and there were all these essentially police vehicles out there. So we stopped in to see what was going on, and it ended up being a murder or something like that. But you know, we were just kind of patrolling through, and we come across this, and you know, the border team was taking care of it.
All right. And how common was it for the vehicles in your convoys or whatever to actually set off IEDs or hit them?
Because we were operating in the middle of the desert, I mean, there was essentially because there was no roads where we were going. We were like traveling open desert. There was no, there were some like tracks that had been made, and you know, that seemed to be some sort of, you know, at least frequently traveled avenues that they had, but we weren't sticking to any of those. We were just traveling open desert. So, I mean, there's no way someone could anticipate the route we were going to be going.
So it's only the occasional trip into town that had an established route. Yeah.
And we didn't have any IED strikes. I know we stopped on quite a few occasions and called EOD. We had found a few IEDs and had EOD come in and disarm and dispose, but no IED strikes.
All right. So, okay, now when then do you get home from that tour?
That was October 2008 is when I was down there.
All right. Now, at this point, are you still looking to get another deployment, or what are you going to do next?
Yeah, so I had already re-enlisted, so for me, I was planning on, I enjoyed being in ANGLICO. They were much more relaxed because they had all these officers. They were pretty much lax on kind of the menial tasks and stuff like that. If it wasn't something we needed to get done, then we're not going to do it. We're not just going to be cleaning for the sake of cleaning, which some of the infantry units, is definitely they want to keep you busy. So we didn't do busy work. We trained. By that time, I had picked up sergeant. So I was in charge of the communications for a SALT, which is a support and logistics team. So we had 3 teams under us, so 3 firepower control teams, and then the headquarters for that. So I was in charge of the communications, and essentially I was in charge of the team. I was essentially the senior enlisted guy in charge also. By that time I had kind of gotten a good grasp on the air and fire support aspects of it and how to set everything up and coordinate everything. And then because I had the ability to actually get people to do what I wanted them to do in an effective way, and the officers listened to me. We had quite a bit of officers, and they took my opinion seriously, and I actually kept a lot of things from them. So I kept training going, I kept things going, I kept everyone on task, so I didn't get bothered by the officers for the most part. I let them know what was going on. It's like, this is what we're doing. So the guy that was supposed to be in charge, he pretty much said, hey, you just keep doing what you're doing, and I'm just gonna sit back. And that was fine with me, because it's, I enjoyed taking the lead on that.
Yeah, well, it is something that an awful lot of officers will say, is that they ultimately depend on the senior NCOs to keep things running and know what's going on, and the smart ones, by and large, will let them do that. So you're basically become one of those NCOs.
Yeah. So yeah, and pretty much every morning I'd go in and brief the officers on what we were planning for the day, and then I asked if there was anything that needed to be done or they had anything, and then I would implement that into the training plan. And I'd give them training plans for the week and for the month of what we were planning on doing. So I'd set up training areas, and I'd set up, depending on what we needed to work on. So if we needed to work on, land navigation, I might set up a land navigation course to send guys through. We might need to work on communications, setting up radios, antennas. We might need to work on fire support missions, so we do that kind of thing. And I'd set all the training up, and we'd get input from the officers, and they'd get tasking from headquarters and say, hey, these things need to get done, so we'd get them. A lot of times it'd be, some sort of online training thing that you had to do, or everyone needs to go into medical to get screened for shots or something like that. So I would add that into the training schedule and make sure it all got done. It's pretty much, if you head things off if you do things before they tell you to do them, then they just stop telling you to do things, because they already know you have it done.
So all right. Now, were you doing this? Was this Camp Pendleton where you were based, or did you go somewhere else?
Yeah, this is Camp Pendleton. It was Los Flores, which is like in the middle of Camp Pendleton along the coast there. So we had nice access to the Pacific Ocean right there. So we'd often do runs down in the morning to the Pacific Ocean, and then do a swim. So we do a run, swim, and then run back. By that time, the section that I was with, we had been attached to the 11th MU, so we were getting ready for a deployment then. Because actually they didn't have the last deployment we went on to Iraq was a company-wide deployment to Iraq. So the whole company went out and detached all these units.
Right.
They didn't have a company-wide deployment scheduled in the future. They had a brigade, which is like a platoon-sized unit, which was like 6 teams and the headquarters and stuff like that were going to be attaching to units. But they didn't have the company-wide, so they had to figure out what they were going to do with the other companies. Because there was a thing about relevancy for ANGLICO, because this type of thing could be taught to other units, and other units could possibly take over this mission. The commander had to make sure that we remained relevant and were participating in a lot of things and stayed busy, so that people knew that you needed the unit, because they had been disbanded at one point. So they wanted to not get disbanded again. So they said, hey, we're going to jump on we're going to send a detachment on the MEU. So we were the first ANGLICO unit to go on a MEU since forever. I don't. They had been on it in the past, but it had been a long time since they sent detachments on the MEU, and we detached. So we were part of the headquarters of the MEU, and that was actually a great experience because right off the bat, once we started training with the MEU, we had been able to get established communications really quickly when we got to shore for any operation. So it became apparent that anytime anyone went to shore, we had to send ANGLICO out to shore also because they would have communications for sure. And then they could go around helping other people get communications, which was great because I'd go out there and I'd set up 3 or 4 different nets to talk to the ship. So by the time we had satellite communications that we could do, and I'd have a mobile set up, and then I'd get up and set up field expedient antennas and do HF ship-to-shore communications, hundreds of miles away.
Okay. So when do you ship out then? You're at Pendleton, you train, you get your assignment, so now when do you head out?
This, I want to say, was in October of 2009.
Okay.
Is when I ended up, because it was, I think we had Halloween and then
That's going to be
yeah,
October 31st. So,
yeah, so it would have been just after November.
Okay.
And yeah, and we again I think we were just scheduled to do the South Pacific tour again, but we ended up mostly hanging out in the Gulf of Aden, by the Horn of Africa and Yemen. They were doing operations from the ship into Yemen, I believe, and because there was nothing for us to do, there was the ship operations. They were doing operations. We ended up going to Djibouti and working with the French commandos that were stationed there and some of the French Foreign Legion. Our officer, really great guy, Captain Kumanjan, he didn't like sitting around doing nothing and wanted to stay relevant. So while we were waiting there, he's like, well, when we're doing, because we do these squares in the ocean, it's like at one leg we're close enough that we can take a helicopter and get into the base on Djibouti, because there's a U.S. military base there. And so he started doing air naval gunfire liaison company. We liaison with people, so he started working with talking to the U.S. forces on that base about working with the French forces in the area. So we were able to set that up, and then we were able to set up follow-on training for the battalion landing team, because they were sitting around doing nothing. So they got to get like 2-week training exercise in Djibouti also, because we were able to set up that relationship there with the French.
Okay. And what impression did you have of the French military?
They were pretty good. Arrogant for no reason. I don't know. It was weird because like we have a lot of we had a lot of capabilities with us. We brought laser target designators, which could guide bombs from aircraft. We had laser pointers. We had spotters and rangefinders and all kinds of great equipment for getting bombs onto targets and stuff like that. And we were a very professional team. We were kind of hand-picked group because we were going to be the first MEU and we wanted to make a good impression, so we were all hand-picked. So we were working with everyone on our team. They were all very mature, very responsible people for the most part. So we came in and we were very professional and very humble, like hey, we want to help out and we want to work with you guys and we want to learn from you guys. And they were just like, oh, we're so much better than you guys. And I was just like, it's not really necessary, but it wasn't that bad. We worked with so the commandos weren't that bad, so we worked with them, and we didn't really get that a whole lot from them. Then we worked with their artillery one of their artillery units, and some of the other JTACs. So we ended up doing like a combined arms exercise. We had there was an aircraft carrier that was going close by, and so pilots need to get certain qualifications. They need to drop bombs to stay current on some of their qualifications. And we were in a position where we had control of a range area, and we could do that for them. So we ended up working with the aircraft carrier, which has dozens of aircraft that can drop bombs, and we have our helicopter deck, which has Harriers that can drop bombs also. So we did like 2 or 3 days of just continuously destroying this range. We were doing like stacks and just flying aircraft in and doing controls for aircraft and stuff like that. And we were working with we had the French come out with us, so they were doing that also because they had JTACs, which it's all part of a NATO thing, kind of where there's like a NATO standard for air support, fire support kind of thing. But yeah, the French, they were, I thought they were a little arrogant, but they had their wine and their cheese, which they actually did. I think it's funny because I've worked with a number of other militaries, and they, especially a lot of other countries, drinking is kind of, they will bring alcohol onto field ops with them, and but the U.S. is kind of taking a hands-off approach to alcohol, and they don't do any alcohol and stuff. So it's kind of funny to see how they'll go out and they'll have at the end of the day they'll crack open the beers and they'll have a good time, and we are just like, no, we're not. We are working. It will, after our 7 months, then we'll have a beer kind of thing. But
All right, but they have their way. All right.
Yeah.
And so how long did you spend out in that area?
Like a month and a half we were out there.
All right. And then from there, then what?
From there, I think that was the most. I know we stopped at a number of ports on the way in and the way out because they wanted to give us, because most of the people on the ship didn't get off the ship. We were lucky we were able to get off the ship for quite a while. So we were getting towards the end of the deployment. We ended up making our way back towards, or the other way, to Hawaii. I think we stopped in Thailand and maybe Singapore. I think we stopped in 2 places. Then we stopped in Hawaii, and they did a Tiger cruise on the way home, where family members can pick up the ship in Hawaii because they drop off a lot of people in Hawaii that are forward advance parties, so they'll prepare the place to unload equipment and stuff. So yeah, I think that was for the most part.
All right. And then is it just back to Camp Pendleton at this point?
Yeah, back to Camp Pendleton.
And then how long do you stay there this time?
So I'm at Camp Pendleton until I think 2011 is when I redeployed to Afghanistan, and this was not a company-wide. It was most of the company, but not all the company. There was another unit that had went to, I think, Iraq, another section of ANGLICO that went to Iraq. And there was another, we got back, and then they started doing rotations with the MEU, so it was another group that went with the MEU, and then the rest of the company went to Afghanistan, and that was in May of 2012, so we got the summer in Afghanistan.
All right. So what was your assignment then in Afghanistan?
So we were assigned to the Georgian Army. We were attached to the Georgians. Held a section outside of, I believe, Sangin. I think the Marines held Sangin, and then to the west of Sangin was another area across the river that the Georgian Army occupied. and we were assigned to them. And actually, we did a workup with them. So instead of doing like, there's a special training plan for units going to Afghanistan. Usually, I think Bridgeport is where they'll go. And I had been to Bridgeport actually several times for training, just kind of regular training, kind of exercise stuff. But we trained with the Georgians, and because they were in Georgia and we were in the U.S., we met halfway, and we met in Germany, which is somewhere halfway. But we ended up doing a training exercise with them in Hohenfels, Germany, for the workup. And then they went back to Georgia, and then they deployed to Afghanistan. And then I think we were 2 weeks before, 2 or 3 weeks before they got there. So we switched over. There was an ANGLICO unit with the, I think, 33rd Georgian Battalion. And then we switched with that ANGLICO, so we were with the 33rd for like 2 weeks. And then they swapped out with the 31st Georgian Battalion. And that was the unit that we had been to Germany with.
Okay. And what was that battalion's assignment at that point?
They were pretty much to keep the area secure. They were running patrols and stuff. The Georgian Army, eventually they expanded on their AO, they expanded west, and I think it was like 20, 30 kilometers west, they expanded to an area that was like known for IEDs, that they wanted to clear out that area. But yeah, a lot of it was, clearance kind of, and just hold space for the most part.
All right. Now, by this time, you've seen a number of different militaries from different countries. What impression did you have of the Georgians?
The Georgians, they were stuck in Soviet times.
Okay.
They were, I talked to a lot of guys. There, and they were saying, that Afghanistan for them was their training to fight Russia, because the 2008 deal in South Ossetia had been not too long ago, and there was a lot of hurt feelings on that. So they seemed, and sometimes people joke about those things. It didn't seem like they were joking for the most part. Maybe I just didn't get their humor. But they seemed serious. They thought this was training for fighting Russia. Georgia's not a large country, and I think 3 battalions is the extent of their infantry. So I don't know how well they'd fare. I mean, South Ossetia was a couple days.
I mean, they might have to borrow tactics from the Afghans at that point, rather than be like the Russians.
But they were a lot of their tactics and stuff were kind of Soviet era, kind of conventional warfare is what they were looking at. The U.S. had been in Iraq and Afghanistan for a while now, so we were kind of, our whole mindset had changed at that point. So we were trying to keep them on par with that. One of the biggest things was trying to convince them not to shoot at everything, because that was a big problem. They would be trigger happy, and they'd just start firing away at anything that moved, and it's kind of like, don't do that. Not everyone that you see is an enemy. There was an old man that was walking, because we were on Kop Shugvani, which was this outpost on this hill, and we had guard posts all around, and it looked down, and there's a river, I don't know, maybe 5-10 kilometers away, and then to the north and south there was villages that kind of spread up and down, or actually nothing down, it was desert down. Up is where all the villages spread north, and there was an old man coming towards the gate, and the Georgians started shooting at him, because they said he was holding what looked to be an IED, which, yes, he was. He was actually trying to bring them something he had found, which was like wires and stuff for making IEDs. We don't know if it was actually being used for anything or what it was, but so we had to bring the guy in, get him medical treatment and stuff like that, and get them to further on care because we didn't have facilities where we were at. But yeah, so it was one of those things we had to kind of rein them in, like, you know, this isn't the West. This is, you know, you got to be careful what you're doing.
Okay, and you had mentioned before that moving around in Afghanistan was a very slow process.
Yeah, so everywhere we went, there were IEDs everywhere. You know, I think 50% of the patrols we went on, we probably someone hit an IED. Most times we went out, we had EOD or route clearance that went ahead of us. Most was mounted stuff because we were there. There was villages that you'd stop and you'd do dismounted. A few of the bases. So we had Shugvani, and then there was a smaller base north of us, about 5 kilometers, and 5 kilometers north of that was another base, kind of like how it was in Afghanistan or in Iraq, where they had them split up. And they would do, ones that had a village nearby, they would do dismounted patrols and stuff, and they'd have minesweepers with them, and they'd carry backpack chameleon things which help prevent from remote control IEDs and stuff. But yeah, so there was IED strikes all the time. The vehicles we were using were the MRAPs, were the mine resistant vehicles. So, I mean, usually the most damage would be you'd blow off a wheel, and someone would smack their head on a hard surface inside the vehicle, or an ammo can would come flying, knock them in the head, or some sort of concussion blast would, you know, cause an injury of some sort. I think I was doing LZ operations when I was there for the most part. I was, again, doing communications, so I'd have to maintain communications with everyone and help fix equipment and stuff like that. But then we'd be running the landing zone. So anything that was going in and out of the AO came through our landing zone. So any injuries would come to our landing zone. They get pushed out to one of the larger bases with medical facilities, or supplies. Anything coming in and out, we'd do supply runs every couple days. So helicopters would come in and drop off equipment and stuff like that.
And so was a lot of the movement by helicopter rather than on roads?
Yes. Every once in a while, I think once a month maybe, we had a very large convoy come through. And it was great because we'd see them and they'd be like 30 kilometers out, and they'd be moving at 3-4 miles an hour, and so slow. And like you'd see them there, and because you're waiting for them to get here because they're going to come with supplies. Like you know, and they'd have like a mobile PX that they'd bring with them. So snacks and that kind of thing that you could buy. And you'd be like, oh man, I can't wait till they get here. And you'd see them on the map for like 2 days, traveling at a snail's pace. And yeah.
All right. How much did you see the Afghans themselves?
Not a lot. We had a Iraqi army, Afghan army unit that was also on the base. And I would go talk to them because they could get local food and stuff like that. So we actually got a goat at one point, and we'd talk to them, and they'd go out and they'd do patrols, and if you wanted something, they could bring it back. So we pooled together some money, and we got a goat, and they fixed it up for us. I ended up getting a bag of beans and rice, and some vegetables and stuff I get on a regular basis, so I can cook something myself instead of eating MREs every single day. So I would have some communications with them. The local people, not so much communications with them. You know, when we pushed west, we were in an area that was, again, heavily IED'd. And so often the locals would know where everything was, because they'd have to know so they can move around and stuff like that. And a lot of the people that lived there were like farmers, so it was a pretty rural area. And you know, we would I think we would engage with them for like intel purposes from time to time. You know, I was mostly, like I said, I was mostly doing landing zones. We'd get locals that were injured. So we had several occasions where there was either a firefight sometime before then, and you know, 20, 30 minutes later, you'd have a local come in with a pickup truck and say, "Oh, so and so was hurt or injured from fragmentation or from crossfire or something like that." And you know, it's questionable whether they were in the crossfire or they were the people they were being shot at, because they'd move from one, like, so the Marines in the area of operations adjacent to us, they'd be in a firefight, and then because we'd have all the traffic that was, you know, going on in the area, we were monitoring it, and there'd be a firefight going on, and then 20 minutes later we'd have a local come by and say, "Oh yeah, someone, you know, they were caught in the crossfire." It's like, well, we don't, you know, we can't tell. It's, you know, we try to talk to the other unit and say, "Hey, can you identify anyone?" It's like, you know, we can't identify this guy as being, you know, your target. So, or we get we get small children sometimes with injuries of some sort. Sometimes they would be related to combat. Other times, I think it would just, you know, just regular injuries, health issues, and stuff like that. And we'd send them out.
Okay. Now, with your teams that you were with, did you have anybody who functioned as a medic? I mean, did you get that kind of training?
Yeah, we had gotten by the time I had gone, I mean, in basic training you get medical, you know, basic first aid. By the time I did my second Iraq deployment, they had developed a combat response course, where they go through specific training for combat trauma injuries and stuff like that. It's much more in depth, and they had changed a lot of things from when they initially had been teaching us. So tourniquets were now a good thing. In the past, it had been pressure dressings, and you don't want to put a tourniquet on unless it's necessary, because if you put a tourniquet on, they're like, "Oh, you're going to lose the limb." Now it was everyone was carrying tourniquets. You'd have people carrying tourniquets for each limb. You know, they'd carry them up on here, and they'd have ones in their cargo pockets, you know, in case, you know, they hit an IED, and then you could put a tourniquet on, and that was pretty much standard. It's like if someone is injured, throw a tourniquet on it, and you know, let the doctors deal with it when you get down the road, for the most part. So we had gotten more advanced combat training. We actually, before Afghanistan, we got to go to what's called the Pig Lab, which is they sedate pigs, and then they do like gunshot blasts and stuff on the pigs in different ways, and then we have to treat those injuries and keep the pig alive. So it's sedated, so it's not moving or it can't feel anything, but they would do like a shotgun blast to the leg, and then we'd have to do like tourniquets on the pig, you know, stop the bleeding, that kind of thing. And you were pretty much tested on your ability to keep the pig alive for as long as possible. They'd do lacerations and different things like that.
So you're learning a fair amount of sort of wound treatment and so forth, but your units would not normally have a Navy corpsman with them.
No, I'm trying to think if we had a corpsman with us, because we would. I know on the MEU we had a corpsman with us, and I want to say yes, we had a corpsman with us.
Okay.
Our section was attached with the corpsman because they wanted us to be self-sustaining. Mm-hmm. So they wanted our section with ANGLICO. So we had our headquarters section, and then we had our teams, and we wanted that whole entity to be able to go anywhere and be autonomous, and not have to rely on the unit to support us. We wanted to be able to support the unit and not have to rely on them to support us. So we had to go with everything that we needed. So we would bring our own food. We could get our own. So we often we would get supplies supplied through the unit we were supporting, but we can also get supplied through our own avenues, which is great because we had 2 routes to work for supplies and getting things. So yes, we did go with our own corpsman, and then when we got there, he ended up going into they had a small aid station, and pretty much worked directly for the aid station there, so treating injuries and stuff. A lot of like scorpion stings and bites and stuff like that. Often that was kind of an excuse for them to get out and go to one of the main bases and go eat at a chow hole or something like that.
All right. So was daily life there any better or worse than it had been in Iraq?
No, I probably stayed as busy as I had. I mean, I had more of a routine in Afghanistan than I did in Iraq for that first deployment. For the first deployment, I was kind of running around with a chicken with my head cut off, where I didn't know what was going on from day to day. We had set up a routine, so we were, for the most part, in the command center. We'd have a shift there running operations, so supporting units with air. We get air on station UAVs to kind of do overwatch of any patrols going on. If there was a firefight that broke out, then we could call air on station quickly. We would get though in the evenings. I mean, Afghanistan seemed to run on the enemy. They ran on a schedule. So like in the morning, you could count like between 8 and 9, you get a firefight or you get some sort of activity going on. Around 11 o'clock, things would stop. It's lunchtime. No one's fighting, no one's doing anything. And that would go on for the day because it was hot all day. And then once the sun started setting down and started getting cooler, then things would pick up again. And then once the sun went down, then you'd start having people in place IEDs. And we'd have different aircraft for different things scheduled like around that routine. So like in the morning, we'd have some sort of attack aircraft that's on schedule. And we'd have them fly at a distance so they couldn't be heard or seen. And if something broke out, we'd fly them in. In the evening, we'd have UAV support, covering routes that we knew IEDs to be placed in. And then we'd have like HIMARS or GIMLRs, which are long-range missile systems, and we'd do, prosecute those targets like that. Or we'd have artillery within range that had. I think they had guided artillery pieces that they were using at that time that we could use. But often we'd have that, and we'd have illumination rounds. So we might do illumination rounds, and so we can do like a BDA on the targets and stuff like that. So it was, but there was kind of a routine setup. And like, in the mornings I would do, we'd switch things around a little bit, but for a while it was me in the mornings. I would do landing zones, and then so I would sit there, stand by to run down to the LZ if there was some sort of casualty that we need to evacuate or something like that. I could run down to the LZ. Aircraft would be inbound. I secure the LZ, land them, assess the injured, and then relay that information, make sure they're getting treatment, that kind of stuff. And then in the evenings, then I'd do COC watch, and I'd sit up there for a while.
So did you have much to shoot at?
I didn't.
Target.
Yeah. I mean, small arms fire, not for me because I was on the base for the most part. I mean, I go on patrol every once in a while, but there's nothing that came to my attention for that, for the most part. But as far as like targets for IED in placers and things like that, or if other units were out getting a small arms fire, I mean that was IEDs almost every other day. You'd find someone. Small arms fire, we'd end up finding, because again, we come into a problem with identifying where the shooting's coming from. Now, it's a little bit easier because it wasn't a large urban area that people could hide at. But often it'd just be a couple shots from the distance, and you get a report on the radio. It's like, oh, shots fired. It's like, which direction, what's the distance? Like, well, we don't know. It's like, well, call us back when you know. It's like we'll put a UAV in the area and see if we can spot some things out.
Now, was it possible to spot people actually planting IEDs?
Yeah, we'd do that. Like almost every other night, we'd. I mean, I think there was like a couple weeks straight where it was like the same spot. Someone was out there trying to put an IED in for like a week straight, or like 2 weeks straight. And it was like every night we were like, it's like you would think they would stop putting an IED in right in the same location, because we'd sit there and watch someone putting in an IED, and then we'd hit that target with, usually it's the long-range missiles or something like that, and then 2 hours later, someone would go by and try to pick up the, they'd take the body away and they do that. And then you'd have someone else come up there and try to take the IED that they were just trying to implant and try to put it back in, and then we'd hit them again. So it's, yeah.
So how were you observing them?
We had UAVs. I mean, could have aerial surveillance. We also had like an eye in the sky. So we had in the middle of the base, we had this giant camera, a FLIR system, which does, regular color images, black and white thermal, so all kinds of neat stuff, and it has zoom capability and all that stuff.
So you could see them at night.
Yeah.
It didn't register with them that you could see them at night?
I don't know. I mean, because it would they could tell if we had aircraft on station. So like they knew that if they heard the helicopters, that they need to get out of there, and that's what they did. And so we would have to, like, if we were doing patrols, we'd have aircraft on station with the patrols going out, but we'd have to keep them at a distance, so they could be seen or heard. So we have them in defilade, quite a ways away. So because if they were on station, then they wouldn't attack. So I mean, that kind of thing registered. And even with like fixed wing aircraft, if they were flying too low in a way that they could be seen or heard, then there'd be no engagement with that. So we would try to keep them out of the way so we can draw out the enemy, and then we'd bring them in. And so I don't know why they would keep putting in the IEDs. I mean, it was like, it would happen. It was like 2 weeks straight, or it was happening on a regular basis, this same location. And we kept watching that location because it was where they kept putting them.
Now, how long did you spend in Afghanistan?
7 months.
Okay. And over the course of that time, did anything change, or were things pretty much the same the whole time?
No, well, we did a massive expansion, so we like quadrupled the size of the area that we were covering. I mean, most of that area was all desert. We were expanding to this road that was far to the west. Say from Iran is where we had gotten, they'd have their identification on them from where they're from. And I think Iran was one of the big places that we were getting people. We were finding, so the people that we'd hit in placing IDs, a lot of times that's where they were from. So I don't think a lot of it was local people that were doing anything for the most part. I think it was just outsiders coming in and causing disruptions or that kind of thing. No.
All right. Now, this was your last foreign deployment, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, had you at a certain point decided that it was for time to get out of the Marine Corps?
Yeah. Oh, I had decided. Well, so when I got back, I was pretty sure I was getting out. I had extend for a month, because when you get back from a deployment, you have to have at least 3 months before you get out. And I only had 2 months, so I had to extend for a month so I can get out. And I had looked into trying out for the HET team, the Human Intelligence Team, or Counter Intel. So I had looked in that, and I started the process through that. But at that point, it was their deployment cycles. I had gotten onto a pretty frequent deployment cycle by that time. Their deployment cycles were pretty much constant. They were always gone somewhere. A lot of cases, I talked to guys, and they said they'd get back from a deployment, and then 2 weeks later they'd be back on a plane going to another deployment somewhere. Mind you, some of the deployments were short deployments. It was, but I had looked into that, but eventually, by that time I was also married and had at least one kid. So, yeah, I figured it was, and I had done a lot by then, and I had, I figured after 8 years, if I do another enlistment, I might as well do 20. And I really was actually kind of fed up with, you weigh the good times and the bad times, and I had a lot of great times, but there were a lot of times where I was just like, this blows. Just the military bureaucracy kind of system that going on, and it seemed to me, I was a sergeant, and that I think it's the best place to be. If I pick up staff, I'd be doing more of a desk kind of job at that time, and it seemed that a lot of the guys that did stay in, that's all they really had. We had a lot of people, like it's funny, when I was in Iraq, it was like anyone who was educated is probably left already by that time. The same thing I was thinking with the military is like anyone who's smart enough to do something outside of the military has gotten out and is doing that. Anyone left in is, they're not getting out because they can't get out. They wouldn't be able to do anything else. Because there was a lot of that, a lot of people stuck in their ways. And
was there any encouragement to go and become an officer?
No, not really. So when I was on the 11th MU, I had I had put an application in for the MESEP program, which is the military to officer, the enlisted to officer program. I put an application in for that. That did not go through. I mean, they only have so many slots for that, and so that was kind of my venture at doing that. But no one really was like, "Oh, you should go officer." I mean, at that point, I was, I was out the door, and most people kind of knew. I mean, and I had told my officers, I said, when we get back from this deployment, I got 3 months. It's like I'm not doing anything when I get back. It's like I worked my butt off for 8 years, and and I'm not going to quit at the very end. But at the same time, it's like you guys don't, you can handle. You guys should be able to handle this now. I got things to worry about before I get out. So, and they were fine with that. And they said, you do whatever you need to do. So it was great.
Okay. Now, what does the military sort of now do in terms of helping to transition people? You're leaving the military to go back to civilian life, whether it's coming back from a deployment or getting out entirely. Do they provide anything for you?
Yeah, so they had a week-long, I think it was either 3 days or a week-long. Either way, you're supposed to do that. You can do it up to a year before you get out, but you're supposed to be given an opportunity to go between a year and during your last year up to 30 days. I mean, you can do it from any time, but they say ideally you want to do it at least 60 days before you get out. I think I did mine like, I don't know, a month before I got out, and that was with that deployment. I had just gotten back from a deployment, and I kind of set it up that way, so I can I wanted to make sure I got it done. And they go over a lot of things, and they try to specialize it for what you're kind of interested in. If you're looking for a job, then they're going to focus more on your resume and interview skills, and then trying to get you in touch with people that can help find you a job. If you're trying to go back to school, then they can have people to help navigate the GI Bill and get you set up for that. If you're trying to open your own business, they got people to help with that kind of thing. But yeah, I think it was, and they say, oh, you can show up in your civilian clothes. They try to make it relaxed, and it's all ran by civilians and stuff like that. I think I went in my uniform the entire time. I think except for the day they do interviews, they said don't wear your uniform. So I didn't wear my uniform because they told me not to. But I mean,
do they do anything in terms of helping or offer to help people who may have PTSD issues or other things like that, or just general stuff about adjusting to life, civilian life, and how you have to behave now, or anything
No,
like that?
I don't remember a whole lot of that. You know, a lot of it was just on like your benefits and stuff. A lot, big harping on putting in your if you need to make a VA claim, getting that situated and stuff like that. But not a lot with you know, mental health and stuff like that. It pretty much, it's, you know, a lot of anything medical related was kind of more associated with your VA claim, and they're saying, you know, if you don't have things documented, make sure you go get them documented now, or make sure you can identify that stuff and put them in make sure they're in your record so you can do your claim, so you can get compensated for any injuries you had, whether they're physical or mental health issues. But I don't think there was a whole lot of you know, classes or anything on like adjusting, or, you know, this is how you talk to your employer. You know, you can't knife hand people, kind of thing.
All right. So now, when do you actually get out?
So I got out. So I had leave saved up. So I got out in sometime in March. I got out. I actually used tuition assistance and got my Class A license through a local school, and so I took leave and did that. So I was still getting paid, and they were paying for the school at the same time. And then I got out, and then I took the rest of my leave and did terminal leave. And then I actually stayed in San Diego cause my wife was in the Navy, so we stayed there until she got out, which was another, I don't know, almost 2 years.
Class A license.
All commercial driver's license. So I drive the big semi trucks.
All right. And so is that what you wound up doing while you were there, or?
No, well, I got out. When I got out, I pretty much immediately got an offer, or someone was told me about. So the school I went through to get my license, they had a placement, and they had got word that the VA hospital in San Diego was looking for drivers that are veterans.
Right.
And so I got a job in their as a motor vehicle operator for the VA hospital there. A lot of driving buses and stuff like that. So not semi trucks, but buses. And so I could utilize my Class A license.
Right. And then once your wife got out, then what did you wind up doing?
We ended up moving back to Michigan, and then I started working for the Rapid, driving the bus here, and I started taking classes. I had actually, so while I was working for the VA hospital, I was actually going to a local community college and got my EMT certification, mostly because I was preparing for the move and I wanted to have options for jobs and stuff, and because I had gotten extensive. I got quite a bit of training in first aid and trauma. I figured EMT, I could probably handle something like that. But when I moved, I ended up getting a job driving for the bus, so I didn't need my EMT certification.
All right. And so now, what have you basically decided to do with yourself? So you go to college.
Yep. Yeah, I started taking part-time classes when I got to Grand Rapids at Grand Valley, and then I switched to full-time, and I changed my major to philosophy, and that's what I've been doing. I'm actually going to be going to grad school for philosophy, my PhD, and
you've also been actively involved with the Student Veterans Organization. What motivated you to do that?
Well, so even when I was at the VA hospital working as a driver, I was also volunteering at the DAV, helping coordinate transportation for veterans to get to their medical appointments. And and then when I got to Grand Rapids, I was actually actively seeking out volunteer opportunities with veterans, and I worked with Buddy to Buddy program, which is a peer mentoring program. And so I have tried to maintain, be active in the veterans community, you know, mostly because I get veterans, have that common experience, but also because I know there's a lot of issues that veterans have, and I've been fortunate. I don't have any mental health issues or anything like that, so it's something I can do. I can try to be that voice in some way, or try to help out where I can. So.
What kinds of issues or problems do you see being fairly common among returning veterans of your own generation or even younger?
One of the big, I mean, mental health issues I think is prevalent, and I think that's also also has to do with society in general, just being more aware of mental health issues, that we can identify these things. But transitioning in general, I think, is one of the hardest things I think veterans are dealing with, is how to go from this structured military life and, then going to this group of people that just don't identify with that. A lot of people just seem out of place. With mental health issues, you also get, a lot of times you get drinking, and that kind of thing, and that, again, may lead to some sort of spirals where people's life just kind of goes haywire.
Well, you managed at least yourself. So
Yeah.
Not kind of go off and deal with that. And now going off pursuing graduate school in philosophy. I mean, do you want to become a university professor, or do you not really know what you would do with it?
That's the idea, at least. In the Marine Corps, I got to teach, I got to lead, and I feel I enjoyed doing that. I mean, I think that was one of the best parts of, having a group of Marines that don't know something and then teach them how to do that thing. I think that was probably one of the best experiences I had, and I enjoyed it. So I think teaching philosophy in the same way, teaching something to someone that doesn't know, would be a great experience. But also just the research aspect of looking into kind of some of the bigger questions. I'm mostly interested in political philosophy myself right now, but I also have like some of these issues related to conflict and combat that weigh on me, as far as why some people are affected by combat and other people are not, or trauma, and when is it right to go to war? When is it, when can I kill people? When can I not kill people? Or when should I? When shouldn't I? That kind of thing. I mean, I think there's questions a lot of veterans grapple with, and society is. I think we've gotten to this point where people get back from war, and we've taken this about face from the Vietnam era, where they weren't given their just respect for what they did, and now people are getting back, and it's like everything you did was great, and you're infallible, and you can't, you didn't do anything wrong. And I don't think a lot of veterans feel that way. Like, you can't just say I did nothing wrong, and that's the truth. I mean, maybe what I did was wrong. But we're not having that kind of conversation.
Now just sort of thank you for your service.
Yeah.
Which might have been a good thing to say to some of the Vietnam guys, but a lot of the younger ones are not always sure what to do with that.
Yeah.
Okay. But you've sort of moved on now to the big picture, and really thinking about that on a level that maybe you hadn't so much when you were on your first deployment. You're now these larger questions you're engaging. I want to kind of close this by just asking that, what do you think you wound up taking out of the Marine Corps experience? What did that do for you, or how did that affect you?
I mean, I think the biggest thing for me was like, there's a lot of things I can do. And even when you think you can't do things, like, you cannot imagine the physical, the mental strain that you can go through. Personally, I mean, I think one of the reasons I joined the military in the first place, the Marine Corps, was because I wanted to test myself. And I think I did just that. I mean, when I'm struggling with something mentally or physically, nowadays I kind of look back and it's like I've done this and so much more already. I mean, there's very little I don't think that I can't do. I can do more than I think I can. And I think I think what it's given me,